Yeah, we can get started. So before we start, can someone briefly tell about the topics that we discussed yesterday? Any one of you? Yeah,
About
Kiran.
matrix and if conditions.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, we discussed the metrics strategies for parallel execution of jobs
yes,
and
yes.
all. Yeah, and we discussed the conditional execution using if,
And
and also
caching
we,
the
yes, yeah, dependency caching for faster builds. And also this dependency caching will help us to reduce the
build time.
pipeline time. Yes, pipeline time. And also I showed you also working with artifacts, right?
Yes, yes.
How you can upload the artifact, how you can download the artifact in other job. So those we discussed. So in today's class, which is my favorite topic, which is reusable workflows. So similarly, the same concept we use in Jenkins called as shared libraries. So let me share my notepad. Let me zoom in. So in today's class, we're gonna discuss about before like guys, are you joining from mobile or laptop?
Laptop. Laptop.
Okay, cool. So today's topic we're gonna discuss deep dive about reusable workflows. So the name itself is saying that reusable, which means you are using the same workflow that you created once across all repositories. What does that mean? Yeah, before we like go into deep, let's understand what we're gonna discuss. So we're gonna I'm gonna show you how you can create reusable workflow. And also we will discuss about workflow inheritance components. And also we'll discuss inputs and secret handling. So how you can pass the inputs, the variables from one workflow to another workflow. And also we will discuss how we can pass the secrets from one workflow to another workflow. And also we will discuss some best practices for workflow reuse. So while you are reusing the workflow, so like we're gonna discuss about what are the most common best practice that you can follow, so that your workflow will be structured and it will be looking good. So like one example is naming format. So whenever you are writing the steps, there are some steps where we need to give that description, like what this step actually does. So you need to give a proper description so that whoever comes to your project, whoever is a new team member who joins to your team, if he looks at your workflow, he should be able to understand not at least the technical part, but what exactly the functionality is doing. So you have like while you are developing or designing the workflows, you have to keep this mind that the workflow should be clean. It should not look like clumsy. And in the workflow, you should not hard code any values. Like in the inside of the jobs, you will be passing multiple parameters for different functionality. So while you are passing, you should not hard code any values, but like in the workflow starting in the workflow beginning, you can define the default values that is acceptable. But when you are consuming those variables, anyway, I'll show that, don't get confused. Whenever you are consuming the variables or secrets, you should not hard code. Even variables also should not hard code. So that thing you should always keep in mind. So these topics we'll discuss. So in my project, reusable workflows we use at the enterprise level in the sense that we use reusable workflow across project. For example, so we have a repo. So this repo is maintained by DevOps engineer. It's basically we are at like a team of 4 members. So one is the solution architect, and other 3 folks we work like as a DevOps engineers. So for the DevOps engineers, we have created a repository which is specifically maintained by the DevOps engineer. So we named it the workflow as required workflows. Just a repo. I mean, the repo name is we name it as required workflows. So in this workflow, we have created. Obviously, you guys might be known now. All the workflows, where do you keep? You keep inside .github/workflows. So inside this folder, we have like kept all of our workflows. So for example, we have kept a workflow for eks.yml. We also have kept workflow for ecs.yml. We also have workflow for lambda.yml. And we also have workflow for autoscaling.yml. So this is the repo that we have like created, which is a reusable repository where we have kept all the workflows in such a way that so that these workflows will be called by across multiple teams. If some teams, if they want to deploy to EKS, they will simply call this YML, which is already created. And then if some other team wants to deploy to ECS clusters, they will call the ECS. And Lambda, if someone wants to deploy to AWS Lambda, they'll simply call this workflow, similar to the autoscaling. So this is like the repository that maintained by the DevOps engineers. But from the developer point of view, they will be having repositories for like individual microservices. So obviously, if your project is running on a micro based, obviously they will have like a repository for each microservices. So and then they deploy the like micro services are like by nature, they can deploy independently. We don't have to depend on anything, any other service. So individual services, they maintain separate repos. So these repos basically what contains, it contains the source code. And initially developers will just push their source code to their repo, and it will not contain any DevOps related configurations. So they will hand over this repository, the source code to us, and we need to create a folder .github/workflows/ and then you have to create one workflow. So this is the folder where we will create for them, and then we'll place one workflow. So if the source code is, if they want to deploy to Lambda, so inside this workflow.yml, so inside this workflow.yml, you will define all the sections like name, deploy to Lambda, and then you will also have triggers on push or pull based. Basically, we don't use push for projects. Always it will be pull request. Like don't mind about the syntax, but I'm just want to show you the flow. So once this is done, obviously you will have a section called uses. So inside this section, so what you do, you basically call these reusable workflows. The way you call the reusable workflow using org name, the organization name, / and the repo name, / the workflow name. If the workflow name, if you are trying to call EKS, then you should call eks.yml, and for like also define the branch. So this is the way you call this reusable workflow from developer source code repository. And this workflow, so like you define inside the workflows tab. One thing you need to observe, all GitHub workflows, whether you are using the reusable workflow or whether you are using the plain workflow in the source code, everything you should place inside the workflows folder. You should not keep anything, any other like root directory or no, it doesn't work that way. So you basically call using user section, the org name and the repo name and the workflow name followed by the branch. So if you go, yeah.
Small note is that mean different organizations can share same workflow files?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the whole idea. if there is a dedicated team that is the core DevOps team, if you say, right? If they are developing the models, they might keep their models, I mean, the reusable workflows on their organization, right? So there are cases where we use pass uh, pointing to their organization as well. It's not always the same organizations. You can call wherever, whichever organization you can define in our workflow. So you basically define the branch. So which branch you want to fetch your reusable workflows. So if you go further above, further steps, like it's not like it's not like 100% best practice to directly point to main, because the problem with main is, let's say Kiran is developing one feature. As I said, he's working as a, he got some task to implement some changes to one of the EKS workflow, and he basically pulled his feature branch from main, and Kiran started developing his feature. And also Pradeep also got some request from the management that he should implement a new workflow to deploy to EC2 instance. It is a, like he wants to deploy some binaries to the EC2 instance. So Pradeep also, he will create a feature branch from me, and then he will start developing on his story or his feature. So like similarly, if there are larger teams, right? If there are like 10 DevOps engineers, obviously at least 5 to 6 people, they will work on this repository. And then one, like some of them, like they will complete the work in 1 or 2 days, depending upon the scope of the work. And then they will start uh, uh, raising the pull request to main from each branch. Okay. And like obviously, if someone raise a pull request, the pull request should approve by the lead or the manager or the product manager, whoever like key part in the project. So once pull request is approved, so the feature branch changes will be merged to the main. Okay. If you point your workflow to the main, the problem comes is like it works fine, but whenever your feature branch has a bug, whenever if your feature branch has a bug, like sometimes it's not always, as the DevOps engineers will not deliver 100% efficient workflows all the time. So obviously there are like loopholes. There are some bugs that eventually will get notified by the developers, or or any other, like say like if you are working as a group, someone from your team itself will come to us and then they will escalate. They'll not, like if he's a good guy, then he won't escalate. He'll come to I mean chat, or he will tell in politely in the stand-up calls, like saying like I tried this, but this workflow is having some issues because of this. So this was released last week, I mean last week by Kiran. So can you like please take a look? So like that politely they will inform us. So then we'll try to we'll take a look on that, and then we'll try to fix that. So the problem is, like what I was trying to say is, if the bug is having and then you merge the change to the main, whoever pointing the main, it will break the pipeline, right? Whoever is using the products of pointing their workflow to the main, obviously they will face some downtime issues or the pipeline may break. So what GitHub has a feature called releases, where you can release your new feature via tags. So you can create a tag called v1.0.0. So the benefits of using tags is that, suppose you have released a version uh, and then you tag the version to v1.0.0. And then like before you release, like you have like tested everything, and you like got a green signal that it should release. Then you should like you have released with version v.0.0. So instead of pointing to the main, I'll point using version v1 or version v.0.0. So most of the times we use version 1, which is a stable version, we call it. So what happens since you are pointing to V1, and you have created a tag, even though if there are multiple changes that goes into the main, your workflow will always point to the stable version, which is V1. And like tomorrow, if there are any other, like if, for example, V1.0.0, tomorrow, if there is someone implemented a new change, that change will go to version 2.0.3. And even like if the main breaks, we will still point to the stable version of the tag that he created from the main. So all these tags we again create from the main. So only we create from main, only like everything, the end-to-end testing of your workflow works seamlessly, then only you point to the tag. So my ultimate, I mean, the thing that I want to try show you is like never point your workflows to the main branch directly. That is not a best practice. Always use tags releases in your project. Okay, so just a second. Like if you guys any doubts before we proceed. Okay. Okay, so let's create a reusable workflow. So like just to make things clear. So right now I'm in my GitHub repository, and I have like my organization called DevOps Hypercuria, and then I'm creating a repository, and then I'm naming the repository as reusable workflows. Okay, so and then I'm giving the description like different flavors of CI/CD workflows. Okay, then I'm trying to add an EME file, and then I'm creating a repository. So once you create a repository, let's create a folder for the workflows to keep. So the workflow github slash workflows slash. So let's assume like let's create a workflow for ECS.yml, and then file the key, paste just paste the content of the file. So and then commit the changes to the. So other thing that I want to show you is like right now you have this repository created, which is reusable workflows. And then you have kept your workflows inside this ./GitHub workflows. And this is like one of the flavor of the workflow where the functionality of this workflow is to deploy to the ECS. And if you go inside the workflow, you see, you have like the name that we are like seeing for the past few days. And there is like a new parameter called workflow call. workflow call is basically indicates that if someone comes and sees on workflow call, then he should be able to understand that this workflow is a reusable workflow. Okay. So, so you have this reusable workflows, which is maintained by the DevOps engineers. Whoever like from the outside repositories or outside organizations, they can point to this workflow. But I'll explain the inputs when we are actually calling this workflow. But if you scroll down, see, you have a job section as well. The job, what the basically the job does, and then the run section. See, it is like pretty much the normal workflow. But if you go like in the top, you have a section called workflow, which indicates that it's a reusable workflows and it's not a regular workflow. So let's like I have created this workflow. So let's go to developers workflow. So let's go to developers workflow. I mean developer source code. So for that, what I'm doing is I'm just keeping this repo as it is, and then in the same organization, I'm creating another repository. Okay, so this repository, let's say think of like this is a microservice. I mean micro-based microservice, and then also the workflow repository name like it is the functionality like building service. And then you have to like give in the description. I mean, now I'm not giving anything. Then I'm trying to add a new README file, and then I'm creating a repository. So this is like a building service where you generally all the source code will sit here, and then you have a main branch. So my target, my aim is to call this workflow, which is like maintained by the DevOps engineer from this developer's workflow. That's my target. So let's create a workflow dot GitHub slash workflows slash. So let's name it as like whatever name you can want, and then paste the content. So you observe, like, can you see, like you have the name and also you have a section called on push pull request, the normal triggers. If you go to the job section, you have a call reusable CI where you're basically calling the reusable workflows under users section. But see the definition. Here we are trying to call within this repository. Dot means which in the current directory, which is inside the workflows. But my workflow is sitting in the different repository, right? So the way you have to call is using the organization name followed by the workflow name. So you have to call this like this. Seems some missing version. So and then while you also calling, you also point to the main. So right now I'm not creating any versions here. So like the way you can create a version is, so wherever you are maintaining your DevOps workflow flavors, so you have a section called releases here in the bottom. So you just have to create a release. Okay. So select the release tag. So I'm giving the release tag as V1, and then this release I'm trying to create from the main. Okay. And then you just give the release title, whatever the title like ECS workflow. For example, if you implement a ECS workflow, just generate release notes, it automatically creates and then publish the release. Okay, so now this, if you go and click on the releases, you will have the release sections where is basically gypsy file. So during your source code or during the runtime, it basically pulls this source code. Okay, so if you go to the reusable workflows again, you will see a tag called releases tag, which is the latest one. So like in the theoretical discussion we discussed, right? We don't want to point to the main. So let's point to the V1, the tag that I just created in the DevOps workflow. Okay, and also I'm along like during like while calling itself, I'm passing few parameters which the workflow is expecting. Let's go to the workflow here. So these are the two inputs the workflow is expecting. Like out of these two, if you see the section called, if you see a section called required, so required is like for this variable, for this node version variable, the required value is false, which means that it is not mandatory to pass the parameter to this workflow. And you also have another workflow called run test, which is required as false. which is also like indicates that it is not required to pass the parameters this workflow, because even if you don't pass these parameters, it will use the default values. That's the idea. And the work like the variable type, obviously you might be aware that like we have a types variable types called string, and we also have in the GitHub action workflows, we also have a variable called boolean, which is true and false. So here, like since it is a string, you are passing like the value. Basically, it is like since it is a number, like there are some versions that you pass along with some characters, for instance. So that's why you are like basically defined as a string in the single quotes. And then you also have a type called boolean. So this, if you are not passing any boolean value like true or false, the default boolean value it will take is true. So, and like the way you pass the parameters to this workflow using with section. So in under with, you pass the values. And obviously 99% projects, we don't hardcode the values here. We like pass it via var section, like I showed you, right? So we define this at the repository level vars. And then you call it via var start node version. So from where this is coming from the repository settings. We go to the repository sections, you scroll down, you have a section called secrets and variables, click on actions, and then you have a variable sections. So inside this variable, you can create a variable repository variable. Let's like, for example, what was the repository variable we given? We given the repository variable as node version. Copy, paste the variable, and then we give it a value called 18, for instance, and then save it as. So like this, you have can pass the variables to your reusable workflow. So and run test, I'm defining like giving as true itself. I'm not touching anything. So let's commit the changes and see what happens. Let's commit the changes and go to actions. Okay, the workflow is failed. Let's see why it is failed. Okay, so the name of the workflow I have given incorrectly. We don't have the workflow with reusable-ci.yml, and we are like calling like version v1. So this is a think of this is a bug. So you have like created a workflow. So like you are trying to call the workflow, but it's not available. But the workflow that the version that you created the workflow is ecs.yml. So let's go to your source code. Let's go to the source code. Instead of calling as reusable dot hyphen ci dot this, just remove this and define ecs.yml, because this is the file name that we had created in the DevOps repository. So let's commit the changes. Go to actions. Okay, like now we have got like another error. So open that. It still says workflow was not found. Okay, let's do one thing. So instead of pointing to the version, let's point to the main and see. What also we can see is right, even if this also fails. Okay, this also fails, which means like wherever you are calling the workflow, it like we don't have given permissions. Like in this reusable workflows, you go to general, then there is a section called under actions. We have a general sections. So like this is like parameter I'm suspecting. We should allow DevOps organization actions and reusable workflows. Then I'm trying to say this. Now I'll go to the workflow again. I'll open this workflow. Like you have basically Okay, let's commit a new change to this workflow.
One thing, Surya, is it repository visibility impacts? Like it's a private repository, right?
Yeah, I don't think because
The
we don't keep repositories public in projects.
reusable workflows should be in the public only, right?
No. It should be either internal,
Yeah, it should be internal or
internal.
yeah, internal.
Let's try that. So the visibility, you can change it from here. Okay, so while changing the repositories, while creating the repository, you will see parameter called internal. But while changing, you can scope it either public or private. But for now, just change that to the public. But in projects, we don't keep the repositories as public.
Yeah.
What I'm also suspecting is that while calling the workflow, this section I'm having doubt. Anyway, let's commit some change. Just making a small change. I think now it's running. Yeah. So it's trying to. It basically called what exactly happened. Yeah, this is like expected error because installing like node dependencies for the Node.js, it requires package.json, which is not available in our source code, and it is failed. But we were able to call the workflow from one repository to the another repository. So how do you differentiate is basically if you go to the workflow file, you have like this like the calling workflow from the other repository. You called using the organization, but if you see the workflow log, you see all of these steps. So all of these steps will comes from the reusable workflows. You go to the workflow .github/workflow ecss.yml. So all this like workflow steps is basically coming from this repository. So, and also like I was talking about the required field, right? Now we have set it as false, but let's change this false to true. So basically the node version. Okay. I'm changing the version to true. And in our source code repository from the billing service repository, what I mean, I'm intentionally removing the parameter for Node.js. What is this Node.js? Okay, yeah, this is the parameter. I'm intentionally removing, but this workflow is expecting the version, which is because we have defined the required as true. So if you commit the changes, see, you will get an error saying the workflow is not valid. Input node version is required. So what you need to understand is, so some of the use cases where the variables that you define inside the reusable workflows may not be always required. So scenarios like that, you can use the parameter called required, where you can toggle in the sense you can switch on, switch off, true or false, based on the variables. And like I was discussing in the previous class, like not always all these steps are required to run all the time. So in if some steps are not required, you can control that using Boolean, using if condition. Only if this parameter, if run.test is equal to true, then only run this, else don't run this step. So that's why we use like Boolean types in the GitHub Actions workflow for the reusable components to control over the jobs, and also you can control the workflow steps. That's the whole idea of while you are basically calling the reusable workflows. So
I
for
think
the
internal
yeah,
option is available only for the
for the
enterprises.
enterprise users, exactly. Yes, it is not available for the free accounts. So whoever wants to use internal, I mean, the option can be visible for the enterprise users. Yeah, you are right. Else, I would have selected the internal parameter itself when I was trying to create the repository. Since I don't have see the options, I tried to create the private stuff. So yeah, so for till now, for the past few minutes, we discussed about how you can create a reusable workflow that is maintained by the DevOps engineers, and how you can create a tags, and also how you can like define the inputs parameters. All these topics we discussed, and the other thing that I want to discuss is. One second, right? I'm just okay. So the next thing I want to discuss is the secret handling. Let me just open the Visual Studio. Let me. Can you guys see my Visual Studio?
Yeah, you can see.
Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to create I have created a folder secrets. I'm just adding a new workflow dot GitHub slash workflows. Hitting enter. Inside this workflow, I'm trying to create a workflow called secrets.yml. I'm just pasting the content. Okay. So this is like a reusable workflow. Basically, how do you find whether it's a reusable workflow or normal workflow using the workflow call? So wherever you see the workflow call on the top, which indicates the reusable workflows. So like in the previous demo, like I showed you how you can call the workflow that sits on the different repository. And then like I showed you how you can call it via organization repository name and .github slash workflows and the workflow name followed by the branch or tag. Sometimes some of the projects, some of the small scale projects, they create the reusable workflows in the same repository itself. For example, if you think like secrets.yml is a reusable workflow, so inside the same workflow in the same folder, they create another not plain workflow. They create this workflow.yml, and then from this workflow.yml, they will call this secret.yml. So let's create the steps to call this secret.yml. Call the secrets.yml workflow using reusable concept. Okay, so it is like basically given the name and the trigger type is on workflow dispatch, and then inside the job section, you basically calling the job name, and then you are using the uses section. So uses section, you are basically pointing to the secrets.yml. So the way you are pointing using dot, which is a current directory, because the secrets.yml is sitting in our current directory. /dot GitHub, this path, and then secrets.yml. So if you look at the workflow underscore call, so that let's validate the input section one by one. So you have the input section with the project name, which is required true, but here you have not defined the workflow, I mean the project parameter variable. So if you like, as soon as you hit with the started giving the values, required values, these values are mandatory if you want to call your reusable workflows. See, if the next variable is instant count, which is set is as false. So this instance count is like basically whether you are passing or not doesn't matter, because if you are if you're not passing, the default it will take as 2. And you have another variable for the boolean, which is set as required as false. So while you are calling this workflow, this boolean anyway it is not there. And if you want to specify in the boolean as well, it will suggest us to specify. And this is not mandatory since you have set it the required as false. And you have like couple of variables, environment vars, which is the type as string. And here it is like required you set it as false, which is not mandatory to pass. Here comes the secret section. So the way you access the variables and the way you access the secrets are little different. Okay. So like the variables you can pass under with like this. Under with you like this, you can pass. And then the way you pass the secrets, we have a separate section called secrets. And then you can pass it secrets individually, or if you define like inherit, you can pass the entire all the secrets from the source workflow to the calling workflow. So let's fix these errors first. Fix syntax issues. Let's ask Copilot to fix first, because also, I mean, intonation, everything looks clumsy. So like it's missed some parameters. 1 second, guys. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So like I'm just, I mean, asking Copilot to just pass for now the input parameters required for the workflow, and then also have a secret section inherit. So obviously these secrets will come from the repository secrets or organization secrets. So if you define secrets inherit, all the secrets will be able to pass. You can able to pass that you created at the repository level or the organization level from this workflow to the reusable workflows. And whatever the secrets that required for the secrets.yml workflow, those secret keys you have to define. If it is AWS credentials, you have to define the key, or if it is a SSL certificate, you have to define the key. How do you consume these secrets in the reusable workflow is using secrets.aws credentials. But you are also passing the input parameters using with, and you are, for example, the project name you are passing from here to secrets.yml, and will come here. And then from here, the way you have to consume the secrets using inputs inside your reusable workflows. Dollar open braces inputs dot whatever the variable that you want to consume. So those values you can consume here in your steps section, or wherever the functionality or wherever the variable requires inside your functionality. So right now the environment where that you are passing from this workflow is like it's a key value. And there also another variable called like instant count. You're passing as 3. So from source workflow to the reusable workflow. So let's go to the instance count as 3 we are passing, and the way you like access inside the workflow is input start instant count here, input start in instant count. So if you pass like this while during the runtime, it will pick as 3, and then it is assigned to a variable called and for the environment variables. So if you define any variable as an environment variable, the way you access is via dollars, dollar and the variable name. Like it's like small links that happens one by one that you should like, and wait, first at least you understand the concept, the flow, and then correlate like what like each line, what exactly happening. Since for this example, you're first passing from the top and then you are assigning a variable. And then, so this variable is not like normal variable, this is an environment variable. So that you have defined. So if you set the reason for your setting is the environment variables, right? Wherever this variable is required inside your steps, you can simply call it as dollar instance count. But if you are not defining the environment variables, so the way you access is directly using dollar open base curly braces input start instance count. So either you can also see the like now I don't see any issues, errors. Copilot is suggesting to use instance count because you have defined the environment variables. You can remove this section and you can directly define like this inside your workflow. But this looks like a lot of lines, right? I mean, in the sense you have to, if this variable is required in multiple places inside the step section. So this looks like clumsy, like you are defining the code and it is not looking like nice, right? So instead, what if you can inside a step, if you create an environment variable like this, it's suggesting a lot of environment variables to use automatically based on the context inside your workflow. So you have, since you have defined these environment variables, you can simply call it as a dollar. And if any other place the variable is required, you can simply use dollar and then instance count. So you tell me like how which one is looks better, whether like dollar is looking simple or the entire syntax is simple. So obviously the dollar instant count is looking pretty straightforward. That's why you create inside the steps these environment variables most of the times. Any doubts?
Surya?
Yeah.
In this workflow.yml, like we are overriding from the reusable workflow, like but once you go to workflow YAML,
Yeah.
I am confused. This under with section with we
Yeah.
are giving project name. It is like we are overriding, like we can
Correct.
override the. You are overriding, right?
Yes. Yes. We're
Okay.
overriding. Because multiple projects will have multiple parameters, right? If one
Yeah.
if you are using trying to call this workflow, you will call with different names. You might require only one instance. For instance, if I am using the workflow, I might require 4 instances. I may enable monitoring. I will set the monitoring as false. So that's why this is like we are passing as a variable. I mean, overwritable parameters. So this will still remains the same if you onboard any a number of projects. And also other reason why we are using reusable workflows is, right? Let's say forget about reusable workflows. Forget about reusable workflows. If you have projects that requires to deploy to Lambda, and so the Lambda deployment, if it is a larger team, if it is a larger micro-based project, there are like at least 20 microservices. 20 microservices that needs to be deployed to Lambda or EKS, for example. So obviously 20 microservices will have 20 repositories, right? So 20 repositories, these 20 repositories needs to deploy to the EKS cluster. So as before the reusable concepts, if someone DevOps engineer doesn't know about the advantage of reusable, he will simply go on each and every repo. For the repo, first repo, he'll create a workflow and define all the steps. Second workflow. For the second project, he'll go to the second repository, second microservices, and he will define like all the steps again. And similarly for the third repository, we'll define again the same, right? And but all of this functionality is still the same. All of these should be deployed to the EKS. If there is a one bug that someone found, and if he needs to fix, he needs to fix on each, he needs to go to the each repository and he needs to fix everything. Or if any new feature that he wants to implement to this EKS workflow, obviously most of the times we, as a DevOps engineers, we work on new features that we add to the workflows. He has to go to the each workflow and update it, which is like time consuming and which takes a lot of time. So that is why we took the whole functionality and then we place it as reusable workflows. And this workflow is like root or parent, which inherits the child workflows, which basically calls from the child workflows, which is basically you call it from a source code. So the main advantage is in tomorrow if there is a new bug, a new feature that implemented in the root, that will be affected by all the child workflows. Like you can able to use the like ready like the fixed code or bug-free code all the time, without like the DevOps engineers individually changing the each source repository. He will simply change at one place that will be applicable automatically to the all workflow, because these child workflows we are like pointing to the parent workflow. So that is the advantage you should like get to know when you are developing workflows. Think of point like the reusable point of view, where, and also as if you see, right, all the reusable workflows, we never hard code anything here. Never, we should not hard code any value. For example, the instance count or the any variables, AWS credentials, everything should come from the inputs, or and then should come from the source code, source repository. Always we should keep in mind that. Never ever hard code the secrets, variables inside our reusable workflows. That is not the best practice. Yeah, I think like there are few more concepts like GitHub outputs, GitHub env environments, parameters, variables, but that we'll discuss tomorrow, because I need to tell those in detail, which is not, I'll not able to cover that in this today's class. So that we will discuss tomorrow in detail. And also tomorrow's class will be on actions, how you can create your own action, custom action. Similarly, like how you can like make use of the marketplace actions, which I showed you the previous classes. You can create your own functionality and then make that functionality as an action, so that similar like reusable workflows, the other projects can also call your custom actions. For example, the custom action could be related to logging into AWS. Instead of defining all the steps every time inside your workflow to log in into AWS, you simply call that custom action based on the environment. That's it. You can use the functionality and without hard coding so many lines in your original repository, or wherever you are calling the workflow, or wherever you are calling the actions. So tomorrow's class will be more interesting. Yeah.
Surya,
Yeah, Mahesh.
suppose we are getting multiple incoming pull requests and we need to approve only the latest one. So how we can we do that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So can you see my repository? GitHub repository page, can you see?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So like if you are working in multiple teams, all the pull requests basically you see in this dashboard, pull request dashboard. Right now, like it will show like number of pull requests open, number of pull requests closed, right? So if there are like 5 DevOps engineers, they have like 5 features that they will create a pull request pointing to the main branch. So we will not release all the changes at a time. We will raise the pull request and keep it as it is. Like for example, let's create a feature branch. And this feature branch is like, for example, test, create a feature branch. So like just now, like this is like a plain feature branch. We need to make a change in order to create a pull request. At least small characters change we have to do, because both main and feature will be plain, right? Whenever you are creating a first time from the main. If you go to pull request, so it will ask you to create a compare and pull request. To scroll down, you will see an option called create pull request. If you click this button, you will also see a pull request called draft pull request. Draft pull request means if someone comes and sees this request, and if he sees as a draft, which indicates that this feature, the guy DevOps engineer is still developing, which indicates that still developing and it is not yet ready for the review. So all the draft request, pull request, they will be like they will be sitting here, and based on the priority, like whoever completed the end-to-end testing of all his features and whoever ready to merge to main, those pull requests alone we will approve. Someone will approve, lead or DevOps engineer, lead or manager will approve. Once he approved, his change will go first, keeping all the other features in like below. And for the next release, if he goes and if he's ready, like this guy, whoever developing this feature is ready, if he's ready, and then he'll click on ready for review. Okay. And then assume like he's like one of the reviewer approved, and then you create a merge pull request and confirm merge. And then you release your change next time. Like now, if I'm releasing, I'll like merge my changes. I'll go to the reusable workflows, and then I'll go to the releases, and then we'll create a new release tag with my version. Suppose like the previous guy released version v.0.0, I'll create a version called v.0.1, and then create a tag from the main branch, because the main is having always the latest changes. So the latest change that I merged is also available in the main. So that's why I'm creating a tag from the main, and then click on generate release notes, and then publish release. So other than that, like there's one more thing I like want to, basically I forgot to point out that. Let me open the notepad.
Surya, but in real time, apart from the DevOps engineers, actually developers will do multiple pull requests, right?
Yeah,
So, in their perspective, like this is the same process, or like if they want, if they are working on dev environment, no approval is required. So they need to test their changes immediately, right? So,
yeah. It's the same process, but they deal with their dev files, and also for dealing with dev files, whenever they want to deploy to the dev, it is like no approval is like we never set a gate for approval to dev. They will simply deploy to the changes to the dev, but with their
like
source code.
okay, like I'm asking, like in the workflow itself, suppose we can keep like any validation point, any parameter we can keep that so that any approval is not required, but in workflow itself we can keep any validation like that, whichever the developer push the latest changes, it can validate.
I don't like get your question.
Like in workflow itself, like we are using
Okay.
different kind of parameters for like
Okay.
secrets like that. Suppose if a developer pushes the latest change, uh, 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 without approval, the pipeline will run, right, trigger, right. DevOps engineer we said before only, right?
Yes,
All the
before yeah.
So that is my question. Like I'm also not able to articulate properly, but
Okay, no problem. I got your point.
okay.
Most of the times they don't deal our workflows. Okay, all configurations will come from their source code itself. Okay. In terms of for is maintaining a Java-based application, all the configuration related stuff comes from the form.xml. Okay. And if there are some dependencies, there are some variables also comes from the source code itself. They don't actually pass it via our workflow. They don't touch our workflow. Even if they don't want to touch the workflow, they have to modify it either in the secrets or variables. We don't allow them to touch our workflows. You got my point. They are not allowed to touch our, and similarly, we are not allowed to touch their development code.
Because actually previously I got some question, some interview, like if you are getting multiple pull requests, what parameter you use in the CI workflow in GitHub Actions, he asked. So I'm not aware at that time. So
Like, did you got the answer now? Clear? Like, now
yeah,
you are able
that
to,
you're sure, right?
yeah,
That process,
yeah.
But I thought some mechanism without that manual process, any mechanism any approval apart from that approval process, any other process is there, I thought.
No. Like we don't always wants to make the things complicated, right? Approval means approval. That is one way before matching your changes. If it's like the guy asked the question, like he wants to just want to know from the process point of view if we have any thoughts. There is no right and wrong questions like this. There is no right and wrong answers. Every project will follow their own standards. But yeah.
So one thing I got, like I had in my previous experience, so in my past project, what I see, if any PR rises, we had a validation checks, like we had created 2 validation checks that must to pass before approving the any PR. That thing we found some kind of mechanism. PR validation checks. That is also one way we can find, I think, without any.
Even we do the validation checks.
Yeah.
Before any PR, even though the guy who approved the PR, even though he approved, but some checks needs to
pass.
Pass. It could be a workflow run, or it could be a unit test or sonar checks. Those should be passed. Yes.
Yeah. Whatever the validation that we can design, like we can define in that validation checks, I think.
Correct. Yes.
That way we can restrict or we can control the things.
Exactly. Yes.
Surya,
that way,
sorry. Okay, please continue.
And so that way we set another level of validation, not just blindly push the changes or push the broken code to the main branch. Yeah.
What is this concurrency used for? Concurrency? GitHub Actions.
Sorry, can you come again? I missed the
concurrency.
Okay, concurrency, right? Yeah, it's like I just mentioned in the GitHub reusable workflow point of view. For example, like I explained how you can control your workflow runs whenever multiple people triggered the PRs. It's like a concurrency point of view I just explained. And also it is similarly the question you asked, right? How do you manage the PRs in your environment? So all that, like I just explained it theoretically. Concurrency is nothing but just a process where you can control your workflow execution based on different parameters.
Oh.
Usually we use it in production, I think, right? We should not run the builds, multiple builds at a time. So that time concurrency will helps, I think. Correct, Masur?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. It should ensure only one deployment should happen per environment at a time. I don't see like we have like a in workflow definition called concurrency, but I don't see that in the real time much use. But we just control like how many. I mean, we just ensure that only one deployment should happen per environment at a time. But theoretically, I mean, in the practical world, we don't use that actually.
But in real time, for every PR, like approval is needed. Like in
Dev is not required.
dev is not only in
Yeah.
production.
Only for the higher environments.
Oh, okay.
Higher environments like stage, pre-prod, those environments we set as approvals.
Normally, this other only DevOps engineers do, like senior or manager DevOps engineers will do this approvals, or anybody else?
No, like only so in my project, solution architect will do, and the DevOps lead will do the reviews. Only these two people allowed, and that is like from the from my project, we work with the clients. So from client side, there's one guy which is a product manager. He will also do review, and from my company side, from my the source company side, like only solution architect and the lead, DevOps lead. Like we don't have DevOps lead, but there is another guy who's like technically strong. We will just review it once. Chief executor, something, not officer, not chief executive officer, but he's like a super senior who is like technically strong. Even he's also having a development experience. That guy will approve it. But no individual teammates will approve our PS. If it is a small change, if it's the guy from the dev lead, if the dev lead guy is on leave, so that time if it is a small change, you will approve. But if you are implementing a big feature or a big workflow, so the right process is like the guy super senior. He needs to he's technically strong. He will basically approve.
Oh.
Surya, tomorrow at what time we have? Same time, 8 o'clock or?
I'll let you know in the group. So like Saturday and I'm little
Okay, no problem.
yeah, that's why I'm not committing anything now. But for sure I'll like based on our comforts only, like all of you. I'll let's say, I mean, make